I stood in the glass-walled conference room after delivering the pitch of my career to Data Secure Ventures, watching their lead investors' eyes light up at my quantum-resistant encryption algorithm. Suddenly, Brandon Walsh, the CEO's 26-year-old son and supposed head of innovation, stepped forward with a predatory smile. Dad said your project is company intellectual property now, so you're terminated. He sneered, clearly expecting to claim credit for my life's work. The room fell silent. My heart pounded as everything I'd worked for hung in the balance. 6 months earlier, my world had collapsed when Secure Logic, the cybersecurity startup where I'd spent 3 years developing cutting-edge encryption protocols, went bankrupt overnight. Their supposedly unbreakable security system had been cracked by a quantum computer in less than 48 hours. Watching the news coverage of our failure, seeing clients lose millions of dollars because our protection failed them, left me devastated and questioning everything I thought I knew about cybersecurity. My name is Denise, and at 28 years old, I'd already earned a reputation as one of the most promising encryption specialists on the West Coast. Growing up in a tiny Oklahoma town where my dad worked construction and my mom cleaned houses, I'd been the first person in my family to attend college. MIT had felt like stepping into an alien world, but I'd graduated summa cum laude with degrees in computer science and applied mathematics. I'd poured my heart into every algorithm, every security protocol, believing that technology could protect people from the predators who lurked in digital shadows. When Robert Walsh called me personally to discuss joining CyberShield Technologies, his Austin-based cybersecurity startup, I'd been living on unemployment benefits and sleeping on my friend's couch in San Francisco. Robert's voice carried the warm confidence of someone who'd built and sold successful companies before. He'd researched my background thoroughly, praising my innovative work on adaptive encryption systems and my published papers on quantum computing threats. Denise, what happened at Secure Logic wasn't your fault, Robert had assured me during our phone conversation. You were ahead of your time, but now the market's ready for truly quantum-resistant security. I want you to lead our next-generation encryption project. Full autonomy, generous salary, and when we succeed, you'll get the recognition and equity you deserve. CyberShield's Austin headquarters occupied 2 floors of a sleek downtown building with exposed brick walls, modern furniture, and enough craft coffee to fuel an army of programmers. The company employed 47 people and specialized in corporate cybersecurity solutions, but they'd been struggling to differentiate themselves in an increasingly crowded market. Robert explained that they needed a breakthrough product to survive, something revolutionary enough to attract major investors and enterprise clients. On my first day, I met Sarah Chen, the marketing director, whose sharp wit and intuitive understanding of tech industry politics immediately impressed me. Sarah had joined CyberShield after successful stints at 2 previous startups, and her ability to translate complex technical concepts into compelling business narratives made her invaluable. "Welcome to the asylum," Sarah had joked as she showed me to my workspace, a corner desk with dual monitors and a whiteboard covered in previous occupants' mathematical equations. "You'll love the coffee, tolerate the meetings, and learn to navigate the family dynamics." The family dynamics she mentioned became clear when I met Brandon Walsh, Robert's son, and the company's self-appointed head of innovation. Brandon possessed the entitled confidence that comes from growing up wealthy and attending expensive private schools. His MBA from Northwestern had apparently taught him business buzzwords and networking tactics, but his technical knowledge seemed superficial at best. During our introduction, he spoke enthusiastically about leveraging synergistic solutions and disrupting market paradigms, while asking no meaningful questions about my encryption expertise. Marcus Thompson, the lead software engineer, initially viewed my arrival with skepticism. A talented programmer in his early 30s who'd been with CyberShield since its founding, Marcus had witnessed several failed attempts to develop breakthrough security products. His reserved demeanor melted when I demonstrated my understanding of his elegant database architecture and suggested improvements that would enhance both performance and security. Robert approved my proposal to develop Quantum Guard, a revolutionary encryption system designed to remain secure even against quantum computer attacks. Traditional encryption methods relied on mathematical problems that would take classical computers millions of years to solve, but quantum computers could potentially crack them in hours. My approach involved creating adaptive algorithms that could detect quantum computational patterns and automatically generate new encryption keys faster than any quantum system could break them. The project consumed my days and invaded my dreams. I filled notebooks with mathematical proofs, coded prototype algorithms until my eyes burned from staring at screens, and tested security scenarios that pushed conventional cryptographic theories to their limits. Every breakthrough felt like climbing another mountain, only to discover higher peaks ahead. After 6 weeks of intensive development, I began noticing Brandon's increased interest in my work. He'd linger near my desk, asking probing questions about algorithm structures and implementation timelines. When I'd step away for coffee, I'd return to find him studying my whiteboards with unusual intensity. "How's the quantum project progressing?" he'd ask with forced casualness. "Dad's really excited about the potential applications." Mind walking me through the core methodology. I'd explain general concepts while keeping specific details vague, sensing something predatory in his attention. When I mentioned my concerns to Sarah during lunch at our favorite taco truck, her expression grew serious. "Brandon has a history," she warned, lowering her voice despite the noisy downtown street. "2 engineers before you developed promising projects that somehow became Brandon's initiatives after they left the company. The legal team's very careful about employment contracts and intellectual property agreements here." "What kind of agreements?" I asked, suddenly remembering the stack of documents I'd signed on my first day without reading carefully. "The kind that make everything you create here belong to CyberShield regardless of who actually develops it," Sarah replied grimly. 3 months into the Quantum Guard project, I discovered Brandon had been systematically copying my research. Arriving early the one Tuesday morning, I found him photographing my notebook pages with his phone. When confronted, he barely looked embarrassed. "Just documenting the team's progress for Dad," he said with a shrug. "This is collaborative work, right? Company property belongs to the company." That afternoon, Robert called me into his office for what he described as a project alignment meeting. The corner office overlooked Lady Bird Lake, and Robert's collection of startup acquisition plaques covered one entire wall. "Denise, I'm concerned about some feedback I'm getting regarding your collaboration style." Robert began, his previously warm demeanor now coolly professional. "Brandon mentioned that you seem territorial about what should be shared team research." "Sir, with respect, this isn't team research," I replied carefully. "I've been developing Quantum Guard independently using my own mathematical frameworks and programming techniques. Brandon hasn't contributed any technical content." Robert's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened. "Here at CyberShield, we believe in collective innovation. Individual ownership mentalities don't align with our company culture. I'm sure you understand the importance of team collaboration for project success." The message was clear play along with Brandon's narrative or face consequences. That evening, I called my younger brother Tyler, a college sophomore studying computer science at Oklahoma State University. 2 years earlier, Tyler had been the victim of an identity theft scheme that drained his college savings account through weak encryption vulnerabilities at his bank. "I promised you I'd create security that could never be broken," I reminded him during our call. "But I'm starting to think the biggest threats aren't quantum computers or hackers. They're the people pretending to be on your side." Tyler's voice carried the same determination that had driven me through MIT's toughest courses. "Don't let them steal your work, Denise. Mom and Dad didn't sacrifice everything for your education so some rich kid could take credit for your brilliance." His words strengthened my resolve to protect Quantum Guard while appearing to cooperate with Brandon's increasingly bold attempts to claim ownership. The real battle for my life's work had just begun. Over the following weeks, I watched my professional world systematically narrow as Brandon tightened his grip on the Quantum Guard project. My access to certain company systems disappeared without explanation. When I asked Marcus about the missing permissions, he apologetically explained that all encryption related resources now required Brandon's explicit approval. It's not personal, Marcus said quietly, glancing around the open office space. New security protocols from upstairs. Brandon's been designated as the project gatekeeper. The isolation campaign extended beyond technical restrictions. Brandon began attending every meeting involving my work, positioning himself between me and other team members. During client calls, he'd introduce himself as Quantum Guard's lead developer, while describing me as a technical contributor or implementation specialist. His confident presentation style and business school vocabulary impressed clients who lacked the technical background to recognize his superficial understanding. Sarah became my only reliable ally, using her marketing position to gather intelligence about Brandon's real agenda. During a particularly stressful Friday afternoon, she pulled me into an empty conference room for an urgent conversation. "I overheard something disturbing yesterday," she began, her usual humor replaced by genuine concern. "Robert and Brandon were discussing timeline expectations for your project completion. Brandon specifically mentioned transitioning team responsibilities once the algorithm is finished." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "They're planning to remove you once Quantum Guard is complete," Sarah confirmed. "Brandon's been documenting everything as collaborative development to legally establish his claim to the intellectual property." The revelation hit me like ice water, but it also clarified my situation. I wasn't just fighting for professional recognition anymore. I was fighting for my career survival and financial future. That weekend, I drove to my childhood home in Oklahoma to visit my parents and clear my mind. Sitting on the back porch where I'd spent countless hours as a teenager dreaming about becoming a computer scientist, I told my mother about the situation. Mom had worked 2 cleaning jobs to help pay for my MIT education, sacrificing her own comfort for my opportunities. "Honey, sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones everyone can see," she said, her weathered hands gentle on my shoulders. "Your great-grandmother survived the Dust Bowl by being smarter than the men who underestimated her. You've got that same strength." My mother's words reminded me that I'd faced impossible odds before and won through intelligence rather than confrontation. Returning to Austin on Sunday evening, I developed a strategy to protect my work while appearing cooperative with Brandon's narrative. The most critical component of Quantum Guard was the master key algorithm, a mathematical framework that generated encryption keys based on complex biographical data patterns. I'd been developing this component separately on my personal devices, never storing it on CyberShield servers. The algorithm used advanced number theory concepts that I'd been refining since my MIT dissertation research. My solution involved storing encrypted versions of my personal code on an unlikely device, my fitness smartwatch. The 5-year-old model I'd bought secondhand for $30 looked unremarkable among the expensive technology that filled our office. Nobody paid attention to the scratched plastic device I wore for step counting and occasional text message notifications. Using my own biographical data as encryption keys, I created a hidden partition on the watch's limited storage. My birthdate, hometown, coordinates, family names, and educational history became mathematical foundations for protecting my work. Only I would think to use such personal information as cryptographic components, making the hidden code essentially invisible to anyone else. During daily team meetings, Brandon grew increasingly bold about claiming ownership of Quantum Guard's development. He'd present my research findings as his own discoveries using technical terminology he'd obviously memorized without understanding the underlying mathematics. "The quantum resistance mechanisms we've developed," he'd announce confidently, "represent a paradigm shift in cybersecurity approaches." Marcus and other engineers noticed the disconnect between Brandon's presentations and his inability to answer detailed technical questions, but challenging the CEO's son carried obvious career risks. The atmosphere became increasingly tense as everyone recognized the ethical problems while feeling powerless to address them. My breaking point came during a company-wide meeting where Brandon delivered a presentation about Quantum Guard's progress. Watching him claim credit for algorithms I'd developed through months of exhausting work, seeing his smug confidence as he fielded softball questions about his breakthrough innovation, I felt my professional integrity being systematically destroyed. After the meeting, I discovered that Robert had been shopping my incomplete algorithm to potential buyers, describing Quantum Guard as company-developed technology with immediate market applications. Email threads I accidentally glimpsed on a shared computer revealed discussions with three different venture capital firms about acquisition possibilities. We're confident in our timeline for completion, Robert had written to one investor. The development team has made excellent progress, and we anticipate having a fully functional product ready for demonstration within 60 days. The timeline was impossible without my complete cooperation, but they clearly expected to obtain my finished algorithms through pressure and intimidation. That evening, I called an MIT classmate who'd become a technology lawyer in Silicon Valley. Document everything, she advised after I explained my situation. Save copies of your original research, your personal notes, anything that proves independent development. Employment contracts are powerful, but they can't transfer intellectual property that was never actually company property to begin with. What do you mean? I asked. If you developed core components using your own resources outside company time or based on pre-existing personal research, you might have stronger legal standing than they realize, she explained. The key is proving independent creation and avoiding any acknowledgement that your work belongs to them. Her advice crystallized my defensive strategy. I began preparing for a confrontation I hoped to avoid, but increasingly expected to face. The announcement came during our weekly all-hands meeting on a rainy Thursday morning in November. Robert stood before the assembled CyberShield team, his expression carrying the gravity of someone about to deliver momentous news. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that Data Secure Ventures has expressed serious interest in acquiring Quantum Guard. He began, pausing for the excited murmurs that rippled through the office. They've requested a comprehensive presentation of our encryption technology next Tuesday morning. Data Secure Ventures was exactly the kind of breakthrough opportunity CyberShield desperately needed. Founded by former Google executives, the investment firm specialized in cybersecurity acquisitions and had a track record of transforming promising technologies into industry standards. Their interest represented potential validation of my work and financial salvation for the struggling company. This is our chance to secure the future, Robert continued, his eyes finding mine across the room. Brandon will be leading the presentation showcasing the innovative encryption system our team has developed. The casual way he assigned credit sent a chill through my chest. After months of Brandon's gradual encroachment, they were making their final move to erase my contributions entirely. Following the meeting, Brandon cornered me near the coffee station, his usual smirk replaced by predatory intensity. We need to finalize the technical documentation for Data Secure, he said, positioning himself between me and the exit. I'll need complete access to all algorithm components, including any work you might have on personal devices. The documentation is already comprehensive, I replied carefully. Everything necessary for the presentation is in our shared repositories. That's not what I'm talking about, and you know it. Brandon's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. Dad thinks you're holding back critical components. Your attitude is becoming a problem for team cohesion. I've provided everything that belongs to CyberShield, I said, emphasizing the company name slightly. Brandon's eyes narrowed. Everything you've developed here belongs to CyberShield. Check your employment contract if you're confused about intellectual property ownership. That afternoon, I received an email from Robert requesting an immediate meeting in his office. The message's formal tone suggested this wasn't a casual conversation. Robert's corner office felt smaller than usual, his collection of acquisition plaques now seeming like trophies from corporate conquests rather than business achievements. He gestured for me to sit across from his massive oak desk, creating a clear power dynamic. Denise, I'm concerned about your recent cooperation with project requirements, he began without preamble. Brandon has reported that you're withholding technical components necessary for the data secure presentation. Sir, I've provided all completed algorithms and documentation, I replied. If there are specific gaps in the technical package, I'd be happy to address them. The gaps are in your attitude. Robert's voice hardened. This company invested significant resources in your development work. We provided salary, equipment, office space, and support staff. In return, we expect complete transparency about project deliverables. Of course, I agreed, but I want to ensure we're presenting fully tested production-ready algorithms rather than incomplete prototypes that might fail during demonstration. Robert leaned back in his chair, studying me with calculating eyes. Brandon mentioned that you've been secretive about certain technical elements. That's not the collaborative approach we value here. The conversation felt like a carefully orchestrated trap. They suspected I possessed critical components they couldn't access, but they couldn't prove what I might be withholding without admitting they'd been trying to steal incomplete work. I'm committed to Quantum Guard's success, I said diplomatically. However, I want to make sure we deliver something that actually works, rather than disappointing important investors with premature demonstrations. The presentation is scheduled for Tuesday morning at 10, Robert stated firmly. I expect you to provide Brandon with any additional technical materials he requires for a successful demonstration. That evening, I discovered the true extent of their surveillance when I spotted tiny security cameras that had been installed near my workspace. The devices were nearly invisible, positioned to capture everything on my computer screens without being obvious to casual observers. Reviewing my smartwatch's activity logs, I realized they'd been photographing my work during private coding sessions. Brandon had been building a comprehensive record of my activities, documenting what appeared to be company intellectual property being developed on personal devices. Sarah found me in the parking garage after most employees had left, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by urgent worry. They're planning something for after the presentation, she warned quietly. I overheard Robert on a phone call with the legal department. They've prepared termination paperwork with clauses about intellectual property theft and breach of employment contract. When I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Immediately after data secure signs, Sarah confirmed. They want the deal completed before removing you, eliminating any risk of client concerns about losing the technical lead. The betrayal was complete and calculated. They'd allow me to help secure the $50 million acquisition, then destroy my career and reputation while claiming my life's work as their own corporate property. Driving home through Austin's evening traffic, I called Tyler to update him on the deteriorating situation. What are you going to do? He asked after I explained Robert and Brandon's apparent strategy. I'm going to protect what's mine, I replied, touching the cheap smartwatch on my wrist. They think they're smarter than the small-town girl who got lucky at MIT. They're about to learn how wrong they are. The pieces were in position for a confrontation that would determine whether years of innovative work would be stolen by privileged mediocrity or protected through careful planning and moral courage. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzling, Austin's November weather matching my turbulent mood as I drove to what might be my final day at CyberShield. The Data Secure Ventures team had arrived the previous evening, and their black rental cars filled the building's visitor parking spaces like an occupying force. I found Brandon in conference room A at 8:30, rehearsing his presentation with the confidence of someone who'd never experienced genuine failure. He'd memorized my technical explanations with impressive accuracy, though his delivery revealed the hollow understanding of someone reciting rather than comprehending complex mathematical concepts. Remember, you're just here for technical support if they have detailed questions, Brandon instructed, without looking up from his notes. Let me handle all the business discussions and strategic planning. Of course, I replied, settling into a chair near the back of the room where I could observe without interfering. The Data Secure team impressed me immediately with their obvious preparation and technical sophistication. Lead investor Patricia Rodriguez carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd built successful companies before entering venture capital. Her questions during introductions revealed deep understanding of cybersecurity market dynamics and emerging technology trends. Dr. James Franklin, their technical specialist, possessed the sharp analytical mind of someone who'd spent decades evaluating encryption algorithms for government and corporate applications. His preliminary questions about quantum computing threats demonstrated expertise that would quickly expose any superficial understanding of the underlying mathematics. Amanda Foster, their contract lawyer, studied every document with meticulous attention while taking notes that would later become the foundation for acquisition agreements. Her presence reminded everyone that this wasn't just a technology demonstration, but a potential $50 million business transaction. Brandon began with a polished presentation about cybersecurity market opportunities and CyberShield's strategic positioning. He spoke confidently about industry trends, competitive landscapes, and revenue projections, covering familiar territory where his business school training provided genuine value. Traditional encryption methods face existential threats from quantum computing advancement, Brandon explained, advancing through slides I'd helped create. Quantum Guard represents a fundamental breakthrough in adaptive security protocols. His delivery was smooth and professional, hitting all the right talking points about market disruption and technological innovation. For the first 20 minutes, I almost believed he understood what he was presenting. The transition to technical details exposed the limits of Brandon's preparation. When Dr. Franklin asked about specific algorithm implementations, Brandon's responses became noticeably vague. Our quantum resistance mechanisms utilize advanced mathematical frameworks, Brandon replied to a question about key generation protocols. The technical implementation details are quite complex. Dr. Franklin's follow-up questions grew increasingly sophisticated, probing the mathematical foundations that made Quantum Guard genuinely revolutionary. Brandon handled the pressure by deflecting to general principles and promising detailed documentation would follow contract signing. I'd like to see the actual algorithm in action, Dr. Franklin requested during a natural pause in Brandon's presentation. Can you demonstrate the key generation process against a simulated quantum attack? Robert quickly intervened from his position near the conference room door. Denise has been handling the technical implementation details. Perhaps she could assist with the demonstration. All eyes turned to me as I stood to approach the presentation laptop. Brandon's confident expression flickered momentarily, revealing anxiety he'd been hiding behind practiced charm. Dr. Franklin, I'm happy to walk through Quantum Guard's core functionality. I began connecting my personal laptop to the conference room's display system. The algorithm generates encryption keys based on mathematical sequences that adapt faster than quantum computers can analyze them. For the next 30 minutes, I demonstrated the technology I had spent months developing. The system responded to simulated quantum attacks by automatically generating new encryption protocols, creating an adaptive defense that stayed ahead of any computational assault. Dr. Franklin's questions became increasingly impressed and complex as he recognized the sophistication of my mathematical approach. Patricia Rodriguez leaned forward with obvious interest, understanding the massive market implications of truly quantum-resistant encryption. This is genuinely innovative, Dr. Franklin admitted after testing several attack scenarios. I've evaluated dozens of so-called quantum-resistant systems, but nothing approaching this level of adaptive capability. Brandon's nervousness became obvious as the technical discussion moved beyond his memorized talking points. When Patricia asked about implementation timelines and security protocols for master encryption keys, Brandon answered with confidence that clearly worried me. Everything is ready for immediate deployment, he assured her. We've completed all development phases and conducted comprehensive testing. I knew this wasn't true. The master algorithm existed only in my personal code, safely encrypted on my smartwatch. Brandon was promising functionality that didn't exist in CyberShield systems. Excellent, Patricia responded. Dr. Franklin, do you have any final technical questions before we move to contract discussions? Dr. Franklin studied his notes carefully before looking directly at Brandon. I'd like to see the master key generation process in real time. Can you walk us through creating encryption keys for a large dataset? The request required the complete algorithm, including components that existed only in my hidden personal code. Brandon's confident facade cracked slightly as he realized the demonstration would expose his lack of actual technical control. Of course, Brandon replied with forced enthusiasm. Denise can set up the production environment for that level of testing. Patricia Rodriguez suddenly focused her attention entirely on me, her investor instincts apparently detecting something important in the group dynamics. Before we proceed with technical testing, I have a direct question. She announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions worth millions of dollars. Who actually developed this encryption algorithm? Robert immediately stepped forward. Brandon has been leading the Quantum Guard project since its inception. Denise has provided valuable technical support, but Brandon developed the core innovation. Patricia's eyes never left my face as she asked her follow-up question. And do you have any way to prove your authorship if that becomes relevant for our acquisition discussions? The conference room fell completely silent. Brandon's face had gone pale. Robert looked furious at the unexpected line of questioning, and Dr. Franklin watched with obvious scientific curiosity about how this drama would resolve. I touched my cheap plastic smartwatch and smiled calmly at Patricia Rodriguez. Yes, I said simply. I do. The tension in the conference room was suffocating as Patricia Rodriguez's question hung in the air. Robert's face had turned a dangerous shade of red, and Brandon looked like he might actually be sick. But instead of pursuing my response about proving authorship, Patricia surprised everyone by stepping back from the confrontation. Perhaps we should take a short break to allow your team to prepare for the technical demonstration, she suggested diplomatically. Dr. Franklin and I would like to review some documentation privately. As the data secure team filed out of the conference room, Robert grabbed my arm with barely controlled fury. Conference room B, now, he hissed, his friendly CEO facade completely abandoned. Brandon followed us into the smaller meeting room, his earlier confidence replaced by barely contained panic. Robert slammed the door and turned on me with the kind of anger that comes from sensing a carefully constructed plan falling apart. What the hell was that about proving authorship? Robert demanded. You're a company employee developing company intellectual property. There's nothing to prove except your loyalty to this organization. Sir, I was simply acknowledging that I have documentation of my development process, I replied as calmly as possible. Good engineering practices require maintaining detailed records. Your development process, Brandon finally found his voice, though it cracked slightly. This is collaborative work, team effort, company resources. Robert began pacing the small room like a caged predator. Let me make something very clear, Denise. CyberShield has invested significant resources in your salary, your equipment, your workspace, and your benefits. Every algorithm, every line of code, every innovative concept you've developed here belongs to this company. I understand the standard intellectual property clauses in my employment contract, I replied carefully. Do you? Robert's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. Because your attitude suggests confusion about your responsibilities to this organization. Brandon stepped closer, his entitled arrogance returning as he sensed his father's support. The data secure deal represents CyberShield's future. You're going to cooperate fully with the technical demonstration, provide complete access to all algorithm components, and stop undermining the presentation with inappropriate questions about authorship. I want Quantum Guard to succeed, I said truthfully, but I also want to ensure we're presenting accurate information about the technology's capabilities. The technology's capabilities are exactly what I presented, Brandon snapped. Ready for immediate deployment, fully tested, completely owned by CyberShield Technologies. Robert's phone buzzed with what appeared to be an urgent message. After reading it, his expression grew even darker. Patricia Rodriguez is asking about meeting privately with our technical lead before proceeding with the demonstration, he announced. She specifically requested to speak with the person who developed the core algorithms. The request clearly threatened their narrative about Brandon's leadership role. Robert's jaw clenched as he processed the implications. That meeting is not happening, he declared firmly. Brandon developed Quantum Guard. Brandon will handle all investor communications. You're a technical support employee, nothing more. But if she asks direct questions about mathematical frameworks, I began. Then Brandon will answer them, Robert interrupted. He's been briefed on all technical elements. I glanced at Brandon, whose pale complexion suggested he understood exactly how unprepared he was for Dr. Franklin's sophisticated questioning. Sir, with respect, some of the mathematical concepts require very specific expertise. I tried again. Are you suggesting Brandon isn't qualified to discuss his own work? Robert's voice carried a dangerous edge. The trap was closing. They were forcing me into a position where any honest response would be labeled as insubordination or disloyalty. Of course not, I replied. I just want to ensure the demonstration goes smoothly. Robert studied me for a long moment, his calculating expression suggesting he was making some kind of final decision. Effective immediately, your role in the Quantum Guard project is complete, he announced with cold finality. Brandon will handle all remaining development and client relationships independently. What does that mean exactly? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. It means you're terminated, Brandon said with obvious satisfaction. Your services are no longer required by CyberShield Technologies. Robert nodded approvingly at his son's announcement. Organizational restructuring based on project completion and changing business requirements. You'll receive appropriate severance compensation according to your employment contract. The betrayal was complete, but not surprising. They'd allowed me to help demonstrate Quantum Guard's capabilities to data secure, then removed me before I could interfere with their false narrative about Brandon's role. I'll need to collect my personal belongings, I said quietly. Security will escort you to gather personal items, Robert replied. Company property, including all laptops, phones, and technical documentation, remains here. Of course, I agreed, touching my simple fitness smartwatch that no one had ever considered worth confiscating. Brandon's smugness was almost unbearable as he realized his victory was complete. This is better for everyone, he said with false sympathy. You can pursue opportunities that better match your technical background. 20 minutes later, I sat in my car in CyberShield's parking lot, a small box of personal items on the passenger seat, and my employment with the company officially terminated. Through the lobby windows, I could see the data secure team returning from their break, ready to proceed with contract negotiations. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. They're signing the acquisition agreement now. Brandon's telling them you were just a temporary contractor. I'm so sorry. I replied, don't be sorry, this isn't over yet. Patricia Rodriguez had asked if I could prove authorship. In a few hours, she was going to discover just how completely I could answer that question. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to a coffee shop 3 blocks from CyberShield and waited. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Tyler, 12 text messages from former colleagues, and 1 email from Patricia Rodriguez that made my heart race. Ms. Chen provided your personal contact information. Could we meet privately this afternoon? Some technical questions arose during contract review that require clarification. Patricia Rodriguez Data Secure Ventures. At 4:30 that afternoon, I returned to CyberShield's building at Patricia's request. The lobby felt different now that I was no longer an employee. The familiar space transformed into enemy territory. Patricia met me in the parking garage, her expression grim and professional. Dr. Franklin has some concerns about the technical demonstration, she began without preamble. Certain elements don't align with what we observed this morning. What kind of concerns? I asked. The kind that suggest we may not have received complete information about Quantum Guard's actual capabilities, Patricia replied carefully. We attempted to run additional tests after signing preliminary agreements. The results were disappointing. We took the elevator to the executive floor where I found Dr. Franklin waiting in the main conference room with his laptop connected to multiple external monitors. Complex mathematical equations covered a whiteboard, and several printed algorithm analyses lay scattered across the table. Ms. Patterson, Dr. Franklin greeted me formally. I've been attempting to replicate this morning's demonstration using the codebase that CyberShield provided. The results are significantly different from what we observed. On his laptop screen, I could see Quantum Guard's encryption system failing spectacularly. The algorithm generated predictable key sequences that his simulated quantum computer cracked in seconds, rather than adapting to create stronger defenses. The quantum resistance mechanisms simply don't function without certain core components, Dr. Franklin explained. Components that appear to be missing from CyberShield's actual codebase. What did Brandon tell you about the discrepancies? I asked. Patricia's expression hardened. Mr. Walsh claims you sabotaged the system by removing critical code when you left. He's demanding we pursue legal action for industrial sabotage and breach of contract. And what's your assessment of that explanation? I asked carefully. Dr. Franklin answered first. The missing components aren't something that could be removed from an existing system. They appear to have never been integrated with CyberShield's codebase in the first place, which raises questions about who actually developed the functional algorithm we saw this morning. Patricia added pointedly. Through the conference room windows, I could see Brandon pacing in Robert's office, gesticulating angrily as he spoke on the phone. His confident demeanor from the morning presentation had been replaced by obvious desperation. Ms. Patterson, I'm going to ask you a direct question, Patricia said, settling into a chair across from me. Did you develop the quantum guard encryption algorithm? Yes, I replied simply. Can you prove it? Dr. Franklin asked, his scientific curiosity evident. I pulled out my scratched plastic smartwatch and set it on the conference table. Both investors stared at the unremarkable device with confusion. The master algorithm generates encryption keys using biographical data as mathematical foundations. I explained, accessing the hidden partition I'd created months earlier. My birthdate hometown coordinates family names, educational history, information that only I would use as cryptographic components. Dr. Franklin leaned forward with intense interest as I demonstrated how my personal data created the mathematical sequences that made Quantum Guard genuinely quantum resistant. The algorithm adapts because it's based on human life experiences rather than purely computational processes. I continued showing how the encryption keys evolved based on biographical patterns. Quantum computers can analyze mathematical relationships, but they can't predict the personal significance of individual human memories. This is remarkable, Dr. Franklin breathed, watching the encryption system respond to his most sophisticated attack scenarios. The adaptive capability comes from the human element in the mathematical framework. Patricia was studying my employment documentation on her tablet. Ms. Patterson, according to your contract with CyberShield, did you sign an intellectual property transfer agreement? I signed the standard employment agreement, I replied. But I never transferred rights to algorithms based on my personal biographical data. The foundational mathematics predate your employment here, Dr. Franklin observed, examining the code structure. This represents years of development. I've been working on biographical encryption concepts since my MIT dissertation, I confirmed. The specific implementation for quantum resistance is new, but the underlying mathematical framework represents my independent research. Patricia's phone buzzed with what appeared to be an urgent message. After reading it, she looked up with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Mr. Walsh is demanding an immediate meeting, she announced. He claims you're attempting to steal company intellectual property and sabotage a legitimate business transaction. What would you like me to do? I asked. I'd like you to join us for that meeting. Patricia replied with a slight smile. Dr. Franklin has some questions about mathematical authorship that I think Mr. Walsh should answer directly. We returned to the main conference room where Robert and Brandon waited with barely controlled fury. Robert's face was flushed with anger, while Brandon looked like he might actually faint from stress. This is industrial sabotage, Robert began before anyone could sit down. Denise removed critical code components to sabotage our agreement and steal company property. Actually, Dr. Franklin interrupted calmly, the missing components appear to have never existed in your company's systems. They're integrated with biographical data that predates Miss Patterson's employment here. Brandon stepped forward with desperate aggression. Everything she developed here belongs to CyberShield. Her employment contract clearly states that all intellectual property created during her tenure is company property. Absolutely, Patricia agreed. But the question is whether this particular intellectual property was actually created during her tenure or represents independent work that she brought to the company. Robert's confident expression flickered slightly. All of Quantum Guard was developed here using company resources during company time. Then you should be able to demonstrate the complete algorithm using your company systems, Dr. Franklin suggested reasonably. Of course we can, Brandon replied quickly. The technical difficulties are just configuration issues, temporary problems. Excellent, Patricia said with obvious satisfaction. Let's see the demonstration. The next 30 minutes were excruciating to watch. Brandon attempted to run Quantum Guard using CyberShield's incomplete codebase, while Dr. Franklin systematically exposed every gap and failure in the system. Without the biographical encryption keys stored on my smartwatch, the algorithm was nothing more than standard encryption protocols that quantum computers could crack easily. This isn't the same technology we saw this morning, Dr. Franklin concluded after the failed demonstration. The quantum resistance capabilities simply don't exist in this version. Robert was sweating now, his earlier confidence completely abandoned. There must be configuration errors, technical setup problems. Or, Patricia suggested quietly, the functional algorithm was never company property to begin with. Brandon made one final desperate attempt to maintain his narrative. Denise sabotaged the system. She removed code to make us look incompetent. I finally spoke up, my voice calm and steady. Brandon, can you explain the mathematical basis for biographical encryption key generation? What? Brandon looked confused by the question. The mathematical framework that makes Quantum Guard quantum resistant, I clarified. Dr. Franklin would like to understand the theoretical foundations. Brandon's mouth opened and closed silently as he realized he couldn't answer even basic questions about the technology he'd been claiming as his own development. The theoretical foundations, he stammered, are quite complex. Dr. Franklin pressed him with specific questions about number theory applications and adaptive algorithm structures. Brandon's responses revealed he'd memorized buzzwords without understanding any underlying concepts. I see, Patricia said quietly after Brandon's painful failure to explain his supposed innovation. Ms. Patterson, would you be willing to discuss licensing arrangements for your encryption technology? The color drained from Brandon's face as he realized what Patricia was suggesting. What do you mean, licensing arrangements? Robert demanded. I mean, Patricia replied with cold precision, that Data Secure Ventures is interested in acquiring technology from its actual developer rather than from people who appear to have misrepresented their role in its creation. The room fell silent except for the sound of Brandon's heavy breathing and Robert's muttered curses. Through the conference room windows, I could see CyberShield employees gathering in the lobby, probably wondering why their potential acquisition had turned into a shouting match. Gentlemen, Patricia announced, standing to signal the meeting's conclusion. Data Secure will be withdrawing from our preliminary agreement with CyberShield Technologies. Ms. Patterson, I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss terms for acquiring your encryption technology directly. Brandon slumped into a chair, his dreams of stolen glory completely destroyed. Robert stared at me with the kind of hatred that comes from watching years of careful planning collapse in a single afternoon. I touched my cheap plastic smartwatch one more time and smiled. I'm available tomorrow morning, I told Patricia Rodriguez. The next morning, I sat in Patricia Rodriguez's temporary Austin office negotiating the most important contract of my life. The downtown high-rise conference room overlooked Lady Bird Lake, offering a panoramic view of the city where my career had nearly been destroyed and was now being reborn. Let me be clear about what we're proposing. Patricia began sliding a preliminary agreement across the polished mahogany table. Data Secure Ventures wants to acquire Quantum Guard directly from you, bypassing CyberShield entirely. Dr. Franklin opened his laptop to display detailed technical analysis he'd conducted overnight. Your biographical encryption approach represents a genuine breakthrough in quantum-resistant security. The adaptive algorithms are mathematically elegant and practically revolutionary. What makes this technology special, he continued, is that the encryption keys are generated using personal data that's meaningful only to you. Quantum computers can analyze mathematical relationships, but they can't predict the emotional significance of individual human experiences. Amanda Foster, the contract lawyer, had prepared licensing terms that exceeded my wildest expectations. We're offering a $50 million acquisition with additional royalty payments based on implementation success. You'll retain executive control over Quantum Guard development and the right to approve DataSecure's technical team. The irony wasn't lost on me. 24 hours earlier, Brandon and Robert had been planning to steal my life's work for this exact same $50 million deal. Now I was negotiating directly with DataSecure while CyberShield faced potential legal action for misrepresenting their intellectual property ownership. I want to ensure the technology is used responsibly, I said, reviewing the contract terms carefully. Quantum Guard was designed to protect people from cyber threats, not to enable surveillance or authoritarian control. Patricia nodded approvingly. DataSecure specializes in defensive cybersecurity applications. We're particularly interested in protecting financial institutions, healthcare systems, and critical infrastructure from quantum computer attacks. Over the following weeks, the acquisition process revealed the full extent of Brandon and Robert's deception. Legal discovery showed they'd been marketing my incomplete algorithms to multiple investors while planning my termination. Email records documented their strategy to claim credit for my work and destroy my professional reputation. CyberShield's employees gradually learned the truth about Quantum Guard's real authorship. Marcus Thompson was among the first to reach out with an apology and job offer recommendations. I knew something was wrong, he admitted during a coffee meeting. Your technical knowledge was obviously deeper than Brandon's presentation suggested. I should have spoken up, but I was protecting my own position. You were in an impossible situation, I replied. Challenging the CEO's son required more courage than most people possess. Sarah Chen became my closest ally during the transition period, helping me understand office politics. I'd been too focused on technical work to notice. Brandon's reputation in the Austin tech community is completely destroyed, she reported with obvious satisfaction. Word spreads fast about people who steal credit for other people's innovations. The legal resolution was swift and decisive. My MIT dissertation advisor provided expert testimony about the biographical encryption concepts I'd been developing since graduate school. Employment law specialists confirmed that intellectual property based on pre-existing personal research couldn't be claimed by subsequent employers. Robert Walsh faced potential criminal charges for attempting to defraud investors by misrepresenting CyberShield's technological capabilities. Brandon's future in the tech industry was effectively over his name, permanently associated with academic dishonesty and corporate theft. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of my new cybersecurity firm, Patterson Security Solutions, watching my team of 12 engineers implement Quantum Guard for the Federal Reserve Bank. DataSecure's backing had allowed me to recruit top talent from major tech companies and establish the most advanced quantum-resistant security research facility in North America. Tyler visited for the office opening ceremony, his computer science degree nearly complete, and his identity theft experience transformed into motivation for cybersecurity excellence. You kept your promise, he said, studying the complex equations that covered our main whiteboard. You created security that can never be broken. More importantly, I replied, I learned to protect what's mine. The story doesn't end with my success, though. It ends with the broader lesson about recognizing and fighting intellectual property theft. Too many brilliant engineers, especially women and minorities, see their innovations stolen by people with better connections or more institutional power. During a recent conference presentation about biographical encryption, I shared my experience as a warning to other technical professionals. Document everything. I advise the audience of young engineers. Protect your personal research. Never sign intellectual property agreements you don't fully understand. And remember that your most important innovations often come from the personal experiences and perspectives that only you can provide. The audience included dozens of women engineers facing similar challenges in male dominated tech environments. After my presentation, many approached with stories of their own battles against credit theft and professional marginalization. I've made it my mission to mentor young female technologists, teaching them to value their innovations and protect their intellectual property rights. My company actively recruits from underrepresented communities, creating opportunities for brilliant minds that might otherwise be overlooked or exploited. Quantum Guard has become the industry standard for quantum resistant encryption, protecting everything from banking transactions to medical records to national security communications. The technology that Brandon Walsh tried to steal now generates millions of dollars in licensing revenue while keeping digital infrastructure safe from quantum computer threats. But the real victory isn't financial success or professional recognition. It's the knowledge that I stood up to people who tried to steal my life's work and won through intelligence preparation and moral courage. Every time I look at the scratched plastic smartwatch I still wear, I remember that the most powerful defense against exploitation isn't expensive technology or legal contracts. It's the determination to protect what you've earned and the courage to fight for what's right. The small-town girl from Oklahoma who arrived at MIT feeling like an imposter has learned that her greatest strength was always her refusal to let anyone diminish her worth or steal her achievements. That lesson is worth more than any amount of money or professional success. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced someone trying to take credit for your work or ideas? How did you handle the situation, and what would you do differently, knowing what you know now? Share your story in the comments below because your experience might help someone else facing a similar challenge. If this story inspired you to stand up for your own intellectual property or reminded you to document your innovations, please hit the like button to let me know. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming workplace betrayal and protecting your professional achievements. And please share this with anyone who needs to hear that they can fight back against people who try to steal their success. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your ideas and innovations belong to you. Never let anyone convince you otherwise, and never be afraid to fight for what you've earned through your own talent and hard work.